Welcome to the Mandala Podcast, where we help you feel your best body, mind, and soul. Well, welcome back, everyone. Charlie McDermott here, the producer / co-host of the show. Once again, back here with Bree Jaworski. Bree, how are you doing?
Charlie, I'm awesome. I'm glad to be back. We've taken a little bit of a hiatus again, so sorry about that. To anyone who is looking forward to episodes, we'll get back on track at some point in life, or maybe we won't. I don't know. Maybe it'll just be sporadic like this. Because
well, I'll tell you, those last few episodes were just loaded. I mean, you covered so many different things, and I love the format, the Q&A, and really answering not only clients, but those outside of your area who really are looking for some help and some guidance. So I think they're worth listening to time and time again, because you forget a lot of this because you've covered so much. But I know for today, we're going to get into a little bit of the personal side of Bree and literally your birth story or birthing story, and how these different types of medicine can work together. And my Lord, your story is so powerful, and I think it's again going to help. The goal of this show is to help your listeners, whether they're in Southwest Florida or beyond. So let's get into that, Bree.
Okay, so this is a personal story. I don't think I've ever shared this publicly. Very few people. I don't even think that there's some family members that I have that know this complete story. So my reason for sharing it is kind of, there's multiple reasons. So I come from I'm a board certified health coach. I'm in med school to be a doctor. I'm going for my doctorate in integrative medicine. So I have a very kind of holistic and alternative kind of medical background, if you will. But I very much believe in integrative medicine, meaning that I think that different types of modalities and different types of medicines all have their place. Now, the difference between, and again, this is just my opinion, but the difference between me and maybe a more conventional, what we consider to be conventional medicine here in America, most of them don't have a lot of tolerance for alternative medicine. They don't have a lot of knowledge about alternative medicine. They think it's kind of quacky. They don't, they just don't think it's real medicine. And that to me is interesting because, the more traditional medicinal modalities that we know and that I'm studying and learning about have been around so much longer than what we consider to be conventional medicine in this country. So it's interesting to me. I mean, again, I know I say this and people are probably sick of hearing me saying this, but I could go on and on about just this one topic for probably a whole entire podcast, how this started in America and how this conventional, medicine that we consider to be normal medicine here in America actually started in America and its roots and everything, which are kind of dark if you know about it. But anyway, so it's very symptom based, you go to the doctor, you tell them your symptoms, they treat the symptoms. Whereas more of where I'm coming from and my standpoint on most things is figuring out root causes and more of a functional medicine, medicinal approach in that way, figuring out what's actually wrong versus putting a Band-Aid on something and calling it a day. And so this story, I think, kind of encompasses how I feel about medicine. It's not that I don't think that conventional allopathic medicine, Western medicine has its place. I very much do think it has its place, but I think this story gives a really good example of what I think its place should more so look like than what it does on a day-to-day basis here in this country. So anyway, so I'm going to get into the story. I have to say the story, I'm going to try not to be too graphic, but there are some parts. So anyone who's squeamish, this might not be the podcast for you. So, but I think anybody who has kids or, even pregnant, this could be a helpful story and something that you could definitely relate to. So anyway, so when I found out I was pregnant in December of 2020. So at the very end of the year, it was a couple days before the new year. And we were trying to get pregnant, so we were really happy, but it wasn't like a, surprise or anything. And I had already thought about how I wanted my pregnancy to go. I mean, I think most people have a birth plan and like how they foresee their pregnancy going. And sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. And I think this is
Yeah.
another story that backs that up, definitely. So some parts went as planned, some parts did not, but I definitely knew I did not want to have my baby in the hospital. So that was the first thing. Now, you have to remember also, even more so, I did not want to have my baby in the hospital because of what was going on at that time,
Yeah.
more so than now. Not to say like that COVID and stuff isn't a thing anymore. I think it's probably always going to be a thing now, but it was really at the height of COVID.
Yeah. Yeah.
People were having to wear masks during their delivery in the hospital, and they were very limited on who they could have in the room with them, and just it was very strict.
Yeah.
So even more so than I already didn't want to have my baby in the hospital, like these things were making me even more adverse to having my
Mm.
baby, delivered in the hospital. And so I decided to get a midwife and a doula. So for anybody that's listening that might not know the difference between the midwife and doula, the midwife takes care of the medical piece. So I decided to have my baby at home, and so the midwife actually delivers the baby, monitors the medical part of it, monitors the heart rate, and checks for dilation, and they're in charge of all the medical part. Whereas the doula is more support. So my doula was absolutely amazing, so supportive throughout my whole pregnancy, but they're actually there when you give birth and throughout the labor of the birth. Whereas my midwife was kind of in and out while I was like in labor
Mm-hmm.
at home. My doula was there like supporting me and helping me with different positions and helping me to like have the best possible labor. I mean, it's
Right.
excruciatingly painful, it's long, it's like running a marathon, but it's like if you could have somebody there running the marathon with you, but maybe like in a golf cart. They're like helping you and like cheering you on, like, so that's your doula.
Uh,
So when I had hired my midwife and my doula. So throughout my pregnancy, I would say I had like a medium amount of intervention while I was pregnant. I had a couple ultrasounds. I didn't have all of the testing that people traditionally have done because I wasn't working with an OBGYN. And my doula, or I'm sorry, my midwife came to the house actually and like checked me every couple weeks. And then closer to the time I was about to give birth, she would come every week and, check different things. So I have to say, I was very, very, very sick during my pregnancy. I didn't
mm,
have any complications during my pregnancy per se, like medical complications, but I was very sick. So I just felt terrible. I felt it wasn't even morning sickness. It was like all day, all night sickness. And I literally got physically sick every single day of
right.
my pregnancy. So it was very draining. I was very, very over being pregnant at the end there. I was like ready to have this baby. And but I didn't the two things mainly that like they were looking for with my pregnancy, because I became very, very swollen. And so, I mean, I'm not like trying to be funny, but it looked from like my knees down, it looked like I weighed 400 pounds, if like minimum. Like I just huge, so,
Uh,
so, so swollen. And so they were really worried about preeclampsia. And so constantly testing my urine for protein and testing my blood pressure and things like that. So I did not have preeclampsia, but I was really, really swollen. So they were concerned about that.
mm,
Um, and so that was something that, they were just constantly kind of keeping an eye on. So that would have been a reason why I would have had, according to my midwife, that would have been one reason why I would have had my baby in the hospital. Because, plans change. Like my plan is to have the baby at home, but if I were
mm,
to have been diagnosed with preeclampsia, we would have had the baby in the hospital. The other thing was if the baby was breech. So the baby was breech, we were going to have to go to the hospital. And so I kind of knew those things. And I was like, just like really honestly, like praying that those things
right.
wouldn't happen, because I really wanted to have this baby at home. And, there's things that my doula, and I think a lot of doulas can do as far as like if the baby is breech, if they catch it before you're actually in labor, that they can try to do to like get the baby to turn
Mm,
around and that kind of thing. So, we had a plan if that were to happen, if we were to catch it early enough. But one thing, this is kind of random, but I'm a person that gets hiccups a lot. And
Yeah.
I get them all the time, like pretty much every day. I don't know another like adult
Oh
that
my
gets hiccups
goodness.
as much as me. But it's funny because my baby also gets hiccups a lot, and he got hiccups when he was in my belly. And so I could feel his hiccups, and so I kind of knew the baby had his head in the right position because of the
Okay.
hiccups that I kept
Yeah.
feeling. I was like, I
Oh
think
my.
he's good. I don't think he's breech. So
Yeah.
I kept feeling these little hiccups all the time, and it was really funny just because. And still, he to this day he gets hiccups all the time too, just like me. So, who knew that hiccups were like hereditary? But
That's wild.
yeah, so I pretty much like knew unless he like decided to flip around at the last minute, I knew like he was in a good position, like
Yeah.
probably good to go. So I was happy about that. So the day that my labor started, it was in the middle of the night. I woke up at like 1 a.m. With like really, really bad cramping and pain. I'd never been in labor before, but I was like, I think this might be it. Like we might be there. And so I waited about an hour. I had already started. I mean, I was very close to my due date, so it was already on my radar to like,
Yeah.
check and measure contractions or anything like that. So as soon as they started, I started measuring like, how long they were and how long in between and that kind of thing. And so I took about an hour just to kind of like in my brain be like, okay, yeah, this is really happening. Like I'm actually really in labor before I woke my husband up. So I woke my husband up. He got up, and of course he's like scrambling around, and I
Yeah.
had this whole list of things for him to do, like who to call and all the things. So he's doing everything, and I had to remind him like, because this is his first baby too, but I had to remind him like the baby's not going to be here for a long time. Like
Yeah.
no
Yeah.
need to run around. Like I know you're like he was like frantic. It's funny thinking back on it. It was cute at the time, but I was like, you have time, like just chill, So,
Right.
because I mean, I didn't end up having the baby. It was like 19 hours or something after that point that I had the baby. So it was a long time.
Oh.
Yeah. So
Ugh.
my doula came, and eventually my midwife came and checked me, and she was like, you are in labor, but like it's gonna be a while. So she ended up leaving and coming back later and whatever. So anyway, go through 19 hours of labor, and I'm laboring at home. So it's like, I mean, again, I don't have anything to compare it to, but it's kind of exactly what I wanted it to be, up
Mhm.
to this
Mhm.
point. I wanted to be able to be in my bed or be in my couch or move around or, just like be wherever. And I was able to labor at home in all the places that I wanted it to and move around a lot. And I wasn't confined to like a bed or anything like that. So that was nice. So, the contractions start getting like they're like literally on top of each other, and I'm like, we need to get my midwife like back here. Like
Yeah.
she wasn't there. So my doula calls the midwife, and she's like, you need to come back here. Like I think it's going to happen soon. And she's like, well, I'm in Naples, blah blah blah. We're like, get here. So anyway, she does get back, and very shortly after she gets back, my water actually breaks. And so within that hour, like, but by the time my water broke, within an hour, I was like pushing, and he was coming, he was being born. Um, so that's another thing that like, I don't know, I didn't know that. Like you see it in the movies where like these women, their water breaks and they're like, "Oh my god, having the baby." And then they're like doing all these things. Like I thought it would happen much earlier. I thought it
Yeah.
would like
Yeah.
happen and then I'd be in labor forever and then the baby would come, but it happened right before I gave birth. So that was definitely not the indication that I was in labor by any means. But like, that's how they show it in the movies, and like you don't really know.
Yeah.
I didn't really know.
Yeah.
And so anyway, uh my birth actually a lot of my birth is on video, which is kind of traumatizing for me to watch because I'm like, it's just, bad angles and just all the things all on display. And my midwife, or
Wow.
actually my doula, took a video of it. So anyway, but the piece of that is kind of nice is that everything was very like peaceful. Like I had done a class during my pregnancy called Hypno Babies, which I highly recommend. It's like basically like you put yourself in like a hypnotic state while you're laboring to like
Mhm.
combat pain because it's really painful. And so, there was no like screaming my head off or like freaking out. It was just like very
Yeah.
calm, whatever. I mean, that's what it looked like from the video and from the outside from everyone who was there. But like to me, it was like horrible and excruciatingly painful and all the things. But so anyway, so I'm pushing and my son is born.
Mm-hmm.
And my son is perfect. He's completely healthy. Like everything's great with him. So we're like so happy, you know. So another thing that you kind of don't know. I mean, I knew this, you know, but this is my first baby. So another thing that you have to do once you have the baby is you have to birth the placenta, which again, like nobody talks about this, but it's like it's just a thing, you know. So you grow this organ while you're pregnant, which is pretty crazy in and of itself. But then after the baby comes out, like the placenta has to come out too.
Mm-hmm.
So then, um, typically speaking, like the placenta comes out within about 30 minutes of delivering the baby. Okay. Sometimes it's a little bit more, but generally speaking, that's what happens. So my placenta was not coming out. And so at this point, like I was just like happy to have my baby there. But my midwife was like, listen, like your placenta is not coming out. If it doesn't come out within whatever amount of minutes that she had in her mind left, I'm going to have to call the ambulance. And
Wow.
so instantly I was like, like, no, like that's exactly what I don't want. You know, like I didn't
Right.
want anything to do with the hospital. That was the whole like point of having the baby at home. And I'd already had, you know, like to me, I'm like, oh, I just like got through this marathon of a thing.
Yeah.
Like, and
Yeah. It's
now I
like
have
it's
to go to
over.
the hospital. You
Right.
know, I'm like, it's over. Why do I have to go to the hospital?
Wow.
So, anyway, so I was losing a lot of blood. I do remember that. I was losing a lot of blood because I had gotten up to go to the bathroom, and I just remember there was like a trail of blood. And
Wow.
but again, like in my mind at that moment, like I don't know what's normal, what's
Yeah.
not. Like,
Yeah.
you know, there's a lot of stuff in there. I just figured like stuff's coming out, whatever. I don't know what's normal, what's not. So, I get back on the bed and I'm like holding my baby and I'm starting to feel lightheaded, you know? And I again like I started to cry because my midwife again was like, you know, this placenta is still not coming out. Like, we're gonna have to
Mm,
call the ambulance. And I was like literally begging her not to. Like, I just
right.
remember being like, please don't call them. Like, I don't want to go to the hospital. And the next thing I know, so what happened, I didn't really realize this at the time, but I actually passed out. I was hemorrhaging so severely, and that's what happened. So I had what's called a retained placenta, and it's basically when this placenta doesn't you know, it doesn't detach from your uterus
Right.
and, you know, you aren't able to expel the placenta out of your body. And so it causes major hemorrhaging. So I'm hemorrhaging like blood clots, like the size of baseballs, like huge blood clots. And I'm just losing so much blood and that I ended up passing out. And so
Wow.
the next thing, yeah, it was all like it was like I was very much in a daze, but like my husband is like traumatized by this because he's
Mm,
like literally like just seeing like the life like come out of my eyes. Like I was just like, you know, I wasn't really all fully aware of what was going
yeah.
on, but
Yeah.
he was and had to witness all of this. So poor guy. But so the next thing I realize is I'm being like basically like strapped to a chair, like because I had my baby at home in my bed, which is
Mm,
upstairs. And
mhm.
so when they called the ambulance, actually the fire department and the EMTs like arrived. I think the fire department got there first. And so there were like 3 or 4 people, but I was like completely like dead weight, like
Mm.
unconscious. So they were like strapping me to like a chair to like try to get me
Get
down
you.
the stairs and then
Yeah.
into the ambulance. So that I kind of like came to during this process and I was just like crying hysterically because, you know, like I'm being separated from my baby. I'm being taken to the hospital. I'm like really out of it. I don't really know what's going on. And so I told my husband, like, I mean, I thought I was gonna die at this point because I just
Mm,
like didn't know what was happening. And I just like looked at my husband and I told him, like, take care of our baby. And
mm,
that was like completely traumatizing for him as well, you know, because he didn't know what was gonna happen either. So I leave in an ambulance and now my poor husband is left at the house in like what looks like a murder scene with all this
Yeah.
blood everywhere. Like, oh, it's terrible. I can't, sometimes I think he like actually had it worse than me. But so we have the doula who is an angel, and her job now is to like keep my husband halfway sane so that
Mm.
he can get this baby that was just born less than an hour ago in the car seat, which thankfully we had installed like the week prior.
Oh my
So he's got
God.
to get the baby into the car and follow the ambulance to the hospital where I'm being taken. So they're doing this like unbeknownst to me. I don't know what's going on. So I ended up at the hospital. And so the first thing that they did was they tried to manually remove the placenta. So I have to tell you, I literally had just given birth. I'd been in labor for 19 hours prior to this. And this procedure that they were doing to me at the hospital at this time was the most painful thing that I've ever experienced. And so, like, I mentioned earlier, like, there's videos of me giving birth and whatever. It's very like peaceful. I'm not like a screamer or anything like that. I
Uh-huh.
was screaming at the top of my lungs, like literally screaming because the
So
pain was so terrible.
they had to keep you conscious for
I
that.
guess I think it was just they needed to get it out, so they felt
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
and then
Oh.
they tried to give me pain medicine, but it like wasn't working and it wasn't working fast enough. And they had to just like because I was hemorrhaging so much
Yeah.
that
Yeah. They had to. Yeah.
they just, my pain at that point was secondary to the fact that I was like losing so much blood.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
anyway, they couldn't get it out manually. And so they're like trying to explain to me that I have to have this procedure, this surgery called a DNC. And so that's, for all of those in conventional medicine, it's done anytime. Basically, they clear out the uterus. So they're clearing out the uterus. In this case, they're clearing out the placenta that's retained in there. So
Mm.
or like whatever's left of it. I don't know if they got some of it out manually, whatever, because that happens sometimes. They'll get like pieces of it, but then they
Right.
have to make sure that they get it all out
Mm.
because you can get infections and things like that. It can actually be the
Wow.
mortality rate for that is pretty high because of infection. And
Right.
so I go in for surgery. So I ended up getting a DNC and also a blood transfusion because I had lost so much
So
blood.
much. Yeah.
And so I get out of surgery. I made it, obviously. So I get out of surgery and they tell me that basically my hemoglobin level was at like a 3. And so to put that in just perspective for anybody listening, the low end of the spectrum for hemoglobin, the minimum for that is like a 12. And I was at a 3, which is basically dead. So even after they gave me a blood transfusion, my hemoglobin level was only like at a 6. So they were urging me to get another blood
Yeah.
transfusion, which I ended up declining because I just wanted to be home with my baby. Like I just wanted to get out of that hospital. I wanted to be
Yeah.
home. Um, but I have to say, I don't know if I made the right decision in that moment. Like maybe I should have gotten another blood
Mm.
transfusion because I have to say the aftermath of that and like my recovery was excruciating. I mean, like it was so I didn't feel normal probably for 6 months after that, as far as like just being extremely, extremely anemic, very weak. I mean, right immediately afterwards, I couldn't walk. I couldn't go to the bathroom on my own. I couldn't bathe on my own. And I have
Wow.
this, yeah, it was really bad. They got me home and I just like laid on the couch for like, cause I couldn't even get up to our bedroom, which was on the second floor, as I mentioned. Couldn't get up the stairs. I could literally, if I had to use the restroom, my husband had to like basically carry me to the
Yeah.
bathroom.
Yeah.
And I have this little baby, and I'm trying to
Right.
breastfeed and all this stuff. So it was a lot. And
Mm.
yeah, so the recovery for that was really difficult. I was in a lot of pain, and just felt extremely, extremely weak. Like I remember telling my husband, like, I felt scared to even like take my baby out of the home because I felt so weak that I was like, someone could just overpower me. Like a kid could overpower me at this point. Like just take my, like, I'm postpartum and having all these like intrusive thoughts of
Mm,
someone trying to take my
mm,
baby from me and stuff. But literally, like someone could have, because that's how weak I was.
mm.
I just like couldn't. I just could not even fathom like leaving the house on my own or anything. It just I couldn't. You know how people carry their babies and like the little things,
Yeah,
the
the
little carriers. Like I
snuggly thing,
couldn't
yeah.
carry him like that because I mean he wasn't big, but that even that extra
It was
weight
too
on
much.
me,
Yeah.
yeah, totally too much. And so
Wow.
it was just a lot. It was a long recovery. So anyway, having said all that, like if I had not had those allopathic surgical interventions, like I 100% would have died. I mean, back in the day, like before anything like
Mm.
that was available, like I would have
You
been
were
a
born
person that died in childbirth.
yeah,
You know, you hear that from like people like in the 1800s, like, oh, she
yeah.
died in childbirth. I would have been one of those people that died in
Mm,
childbirth. Um, and so I'm grateful, I'm grateful for that intervention 100%. So I would be the hugest hypocrite to sit here and say that there's no place for allopathic or surgical interventions,
yeah.
because at that point it's not like, oh, why does she have a retained placenta? Let's try to get to the root cause of this. It's like, no, like I need help right now, right? Like it's not,
Yeah,
it's past the point of anything preventative. It's like
right.
intervene right now or like you're going to lose your life. And so I'm extremely grateful for that. So having said that, that's why I come from a much more integrative approach in that like everything has its place. Now, I don't think that, most conventional medicine like has a place in what should be more preventative, in my opinion. I think there's a lot of things that we just bypass all alternatives and go straight to surgery, or we go straight to medication, and that isn't my way of thinking about how things
Yeah,
should be done in a medicinal way. I think that um you know surgery and things like that should be more like a last case kind of thing. Like if
yeah.
this is our last case scenario, like this is the only thing that we can do right now to save this person's life or give them a much better quality of life or whatever. Like these surgical interventions should be not the first thing that's like pushed out. So
Mm,
yeah, so I definitely believe in kind of all of the different things that we have discovered as humans and all of the things that we've noticed and come to terms with that work. And some on a more allopathic side and some on the more holistic side, everything works together in a really integrative way. And that's kind of where I come from as far as my way of thinking and approaching health and wellness. So
yeah.
yeah, so that's my birth story. And as a side note, like my son is never been sick a day in his life. He's
Mm.
complete. So for all the people that told me I was crazy for having a home birth, like maybe I am crazy currently, who knows? But I'm not going to say I'm not. But at the same
Mhm.
time, like that would have happened to me whether I was
Yeah,
at home, in the
yeah.
hospital, at a birthing center, like that was going to happen to me regardless. So, I'm very grateful for the intervention that I was given, but like at the same time, it had nothing to do with my home birth. So I don't want to scare anyone away from having a home birth. You just need to make sure that you have contingency plans,
Yeah,
and if you
yeah,
have your baby in a birthing center, they always have contingency plans in case
yeah.
there's an emergency to get you to, a hospital or whatever. So just make sure that you plan for the,
Mm,
the worst case scenario because it probably won't happen. I mean, a retained placenta happens in less than 2% of births. So it's rare, so it's probably
yeah,
not going to happen to you. But
yeah.
everything about my home birth was amazing and that was going to happen regardless, but you just have to have a plan. So I
Yeah.
don't I don't tell that story in order to like scare anyone away from having a home birth at all because I think if I end up having another baby, that's still I'm either going to have the baby at home or in a birthing center, something not, traditional hospital
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
setting. And so it definitely didn't scare me away from it. It's just you have to just be careful and have people around you that know what they're doing. You definitely you don't
yeah,
want to I don't want to say you don't want to have a home birth, but definitely not a first time mom home birth without a midwife. Like you want to
yeah,
have a medical person there to like, because she made that call which I given to left to my own devices, I would not have made that call because I was so against going to the hospital. So just having someone to like intervene and be like, no, we're calling the ambulance,
Yeah. Yeah.
you don't
Yeah.
get
And
a
you're just not
choice.
in a
If you,
state of mind to make a decision like that. Right. Yeah.
yeah, if
Yeah.
you pass out, you don't get a vote anymore. Sorry. Pretty much. Yeah. So yeah, so
Wow.
I can get in at a later date. Maybe we can talk about some of the other like health related things that I do here in my practice. And I'm very much about like health and wellness and prevention and those kind of things. But I
Yeah.
never want anyone to think that I'm like discrediting other ways of doing things. It's just that I
Yeah.
think that everything has its place,
Yep.
So yeah,
Yep. Yeah. No, I'm with you. Medicine should not be a one size fits all. I mean,
exactly.
there's so many different paths out there that can be even more helpful depending on. I mean, yeah, if you get a, hopefully this doesn't happen, the gunshot wound scenario. I mean, okay,
Yes,
we need to address this. But you made the
exactly.
point earlier, Bree, about treating the symptom versus the core, and I've said this to Barb, my wife, a number of times. Often. Again, I'm putting everyone in the bucket, and this is not to discredit anyone or any profession, but in today's medical, world, because I think because of insurance and education and everything else,
Hmm.
there's a tendency to it's like if I'm rolled into the emergency room, and please correct me if I don't have this right, because you have way a more impressive background than myself, but it almost seems like if I'm bleeding out on the table, and the doctor sees a paper cut that's about to be infected, that like, hey, we need to address this wound here. This paper cut, it might get infected.
Yeah,
And it was like, no, no, there's a
right.
bigger issue here,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
and as you know, we kind of have a personal story with our daughter that a different path than what you went along, but it really opened our eyes to
Hmm.
the other alternatives out there, and via those alternatives, she was able to literally get her life back. So
Yeah.
and that's why I'm such a big fan of what you do and your team there.
Thanks.
It gives hope, and we don't have to live a certain way. It's not our lot in life. Well, whatever, I was born this way, or this is just the
Mhm.
way it is. No, there are people out there that can help you. So
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. And like, yeah, and just knowing that, especially when it comes to birth, like you can advocate for yourself. You don't have to just do X, Y, and Z because that's what everybody else does. And, we only really started having babies in hospitals,
I was
in,
thinking that. Yeah,
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 it during the 1900s. It hasn't been that long that, it, it,
yeah,
it being the norm that people have babies in hospitals didn't start happening until like the
yeah,
1950s. So,
yeah.
there have been a lot of people that have given birth outside of, and not to say that I'm not discrediting
Hey,
anybody that does
yeah,
have a baby in a hospital. I'm just saying like it's okay to question things and it's okay to not do the status quo and like what everybody else is doing and questioning some of the methods. Like even, just little things that I learned along the way, like you don't have to wear a hospital gown if you're giving birth in a hospital. You're not sick. You're not a patient in that way.
really?
You can wear your own regular comfortable clothes and people just don't know. And
Wow.
so you
Right.
have to like and they don't really offer up this information either. So
No,
you have to be
no.
your own advocate about stuff like that. You don't have to get all the vaccines. You don't have to get all the things that they offer. Even
Mm,
during pregnancy, there's different shots and things that you're offered. You can decline all of those things if you
mm,
don't want to. So just knowing that you have options and
yeah,
there are different ways and people that see things different ways that can help you to understand what your options are too.
yeah.
So
Terrific.
that's it. That's the story. I hope
Well,
everybody enjoyed it. Hopefully it wasn't too disgusting, but it's just life.
no, no. It's really helped us identify, back again to the let's not box ourselves in. We don't all have to follow the same conventional path as
Right.
whether it be our parents or our friends or whatnot. Look at the
Right.
different options and I guess choose what's best for you
Exactly.
and hey, we're lucky we're in a society, a country where you do have options, right? And
Absolutely.
so awesome.
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
agree.
Well, hey, thank you again for sharing that, and Boy, oh boy, I can't wait for your next episode. But for now, we'll end this one, Bree. You have a wonderful rest of the day there.
You too. Thanks for listening, guys.
Thanks for listening to the Mandala Podcast. To learn more about Mandala counseling and health coaching, go to www.mandala-counseling.com. That's www.mandala-counseling, counseling.com, or call 239-360-1983, or visit us on Facebook or Instagram.